The Dnieper River does not remember the names of the kings it drowns, but it remembers the weight of their crowns. In the early spring of 972, the water was high, bloated with the meltwater of 1,000 nameless hills, rushing toward the Black Sea with a violent, indifferent energy. On the shoreline, the tall grass did not just sway in the wind, it breathed. It hid a predator that had been waiting for months, a patient shadow composed of iron and hunger. For Sviatoslav, the Grand Prince of Kiev, the horizon had narrowed to the point of a blade. He was not just a man in retreat, he was a legend being funneled into a grave. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the metallic tang of something final. He could feel the eyes on him from the cliffs, 1,000 gazes weighing the value of his life against the gold they had been promised. This was not a battlefield. It was a slaughterhouse, with the river as its only witness. To understand how a man who had dismantled empires found himself trapped in the mud, one must understand the man himself. Sviatoslav was a ghost among his own people. He did not reside in the gilded halls of Kiev, surrounded by soft cushions and the smell of incense. He lived like a wolf. He slept on the hard ground with his saddle for a pillow and a coarse cloak for a blanket. He ate the same charred meat as his youngest soldier, sliced thin with his own dagger. He was a man of the sword, rejecting the rising tide of Christianity and the comforts of civilization. His head was shaved clean, except for a single lock of hair, a mark of his noble lineage that fluttered like a banner in the wind. He was the last of the great Viking-style princes, a storm that blew from the Baltic to the Caspian, leaving only ruins in his wake. The tension that led to this riverbank began in the marble corridors of Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire was built on the belief that a well-placed whisper was more effective than 1,000 spears. To the Byzantines, Sviatoslav was a magnificent, terrifying tool. They had hired him to crush their enemies, but a tool that can cut anything is a danger to the hand that holds it. Sviatoslav had become too powerful, too bold, and far too indifferent to the rules of diplomacy. He did not want to be a mercenary. He wanted his capital on the Danube, right on the doorstep of the Byzantine world. This ambition was his shadow, lengthening as his sun began to set. The Siege of Dorostolon had been the turning point. For months, the Rus forces had been locked in a grinding stalemate against the heavy-armored legions of the Mediterranean. It was a clash of two different philosophies of war: the disciplined, bureaucratic might of the Greeks versus the raw, shield-clashing energy of the north. The walls of the city had seen blood flow like wine, but in the end, it was hunger that dictated the terms. Sviatoslav, seeing his men wither, agreed to a peace. He would leave the Danube and return to Kiev. He stood on the banks of the river and met the Byzantine Emperor, John Tzimiskes. The emperor arrived in gold-plated armor on a magnificent horse. Sviatoslav arrived in a simple rowboat, pulling an oar alongside his men. They exchanged words of peace, but beneath the emperor's smile was a death sentence. As the Rus flotilla moved north toward home, they were a shadow of their former selves. They were depleted, carrying the wounded, and burdened by the weight of their own pride. They were moving toward the cataracts, the great rapids of the Dnieper, where the water becomes a churning white madness over jagged rocks. In these places, the boats could not be rowed. They had to be dragged overland by exhausted men. It was here that the geography of the land conspired with the treachery of men. Records suggest that the Byzantine emperor sent word to the Pecheneg nomads, a fierce tribe of steppe warriors who controlled the territory. The message was simple. The prince is coming. His boats are heavy, and his men are few. The winter of 971 was a slow, agonizing descent into the dark. Stranded at a place called Beloberezhye, the Rus found themselves trapped by the ice and the watchful eyes of the Pechenegs. The wind howled through the camp like a starving beast. Food became more valuable than silver. History whispers that a single horse's head was sold for half a pound of gold during those desperate months. Sviatoslav watched his army fade, their ribs beginning to show through their furs, their eyes growing hollow and bright with the fever of starvation. He remained stoic, a pillar of iron in a world of melting hope. He knew the Pechenegs were out there, huddled around their own fires, waiting for the thaw. They were not in a hurry. They knew that time was a more effective weapon than any arrow. When the ice finally groaned and cracked in the spring of 972, the prince made his move. It was a choice born of necessity rather than tactical brilliance. To stay was to starve. To move was to fight. They reached the largest of the rapids, a place where the Dnieper narrows and the cliffs press in close, suffocating the light. The sound of the water was a constant, deafening roar, masking the sounds of the forest. As the men stepped into the mud to haul the heavy oak vessels over the slick stones, the silence of the woods was shattered. The Pechenegs did not attack with a grand formation. They fell upon the Rus like a sudden, terminal fever. The ambush was a masterpiece of chaos. The Rus, separated from their boats and unable to form their legendary shield wall on the uneven terrain, were cut down in fragmented groups. Arrows hissed through the spray of the rapids, finding the gaps in mail and the soft tissue of necks. Sviatoslav was at the center of it, a whirlwind of steel in the mud. He fought not for an empire or a crown, but for the sheer brutal survival of the moment. He moved with a feral grace, his blade a blur that caught the gray light of the overcast sky. But for every nomad he felled, 3 more appeared from the tree line. The ground became a slick slurry of mud and crimson. There were no songs to be sung in that place, only the grunts of exertion, the splashing of heavy boots in the shallows, and the wet thud of axes meeting bone. The prince, the man who had terrified the East and shaken the foundations of the world's greatest empire, was eventually overwhelmed. The scene was one of primal desperation. Sviatoslav was a figure of iron, standing waist-deep in the rushing water, his back against a jagged rock. His shield was splintered, his arm heavy with the weight of 100 kills. But his eyes never lost their predatory gleam. He was not taken prisoner. He did not plead for his life. He died in the spray of the river he had tried to master, buried under the weight of 1,000 nameless enemies. As his life ebbed away into the Dnieper, the roar of the rapids seemed to grow louder, as if the river itself were reclaiming the soul of the man who had dared to think he could own it. But the death of Sviatoslav was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a grim transformation. The Pecheneg Khan, a man named Kuria, understood the value of the spirit. In the logic of the steppe, the strength of an enemy was something that could be captured and repurposed. He did not leave the prince's body to the crows. According to ancient chronicles, Kuria ordered that Sviatoslav's skull be recovered from the field of slaughter. The process was cold and methodical. The flesh was stripped away, the bone cleaned and polished until it shone like ivory. Then it was encased in beaten silver. The jaw was hinged with precious metal, and the cranium was lined to hold liquid. The Grand Prince of Kiev, the man who lived like a soldier and despised the finery of kings, was turned into a ceremonial chalice. This silver-lined vessel became a centerpiece of Curia's court. It is said that the Khan and his wife drank from the prince's skull, hoping that by consuming wine from his remains, his indomitable courage and his restless spirit would pass into their own bloodline. This image, the silver skull, is the ultimate metaphor for the era. It represents a world where power was a physical, tangible thing that could be stolen, worn, or drunk. The skull was a trophy, a grim reminder that even the most formidable warriors are eventually consumed by the land they sought to conquer. It was a toast to a victory that was bought with Byzantine gold and Pecheneg blood, a physical bridge between the life of a legend and the utility of a tool. One can only imagine the cold satisfaction in Constantinople when the news arrived. The emperor had achieved his goal without risking a single Byzantine life. The Rus threat had been neutralized, and the Pechenegs had been satiated with loot. But the theater of shadows is a dangerous game. By removing the old lion, Sviatoslav, the Byzantines cleared the way for his sons, leading to a period of internal strife and the eventual rise of Vladimir the Great. The betrayal at the Rapids was a short-term solution that reshaped the destiny of Eastern Europe in ways the emperor could never have predicted. The vacuum left by Sviatoslav's death allowed for the introduction of a new faith and a new way of life that would eventually erase the pagan traditions the prince had died to protect. The mystery of the silver skull persists because it touches something primal in our collective memory. It is a story about the fragility of legacy. Sviatoslav wanted to be a bridge between worlds, a conqueror who united the North and the South. Instead, his physical self was repurposed into a tool for his enemies. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and treaties. It is a narrative of human ambition meeting the cold, hard reality of the environment. The prince's absence left a hole in the heart of the Rus, a space where the roar of the old gods was silenced by the steady, quiet growth of a centralized state. He was the last of his kind, and his end was as violent and unpolished as his life. Looking back at the 10th century, we see a landscape of mist, steel, and blood. The death of Sviatoslav is a pivot point in the story of a continent. Had he survived the Rapids, the map of Europe might be unrecognizable today. He was a man of the old world, a pagan king who rejected the comforts of the new monotheistic empires rising around him. His fall signaled the end of a certain kind of raw, unbridled expansion. After him, the Rus would begin to settle, to build cathedrals instead of burning fortresses, and to look toward the cross rather than the sword. But that transition was paid for in the crimson of the Dnieper. The river washed away the bodies, but it could not wash away the memory of the ambush. The legend of the Silver Skull also forces us to confront the nature of memory. In the centuries that followed, Sviatoslav was celebrated as a hero, a symbol of military prowess and unyielding spirit. His defeat at the Rapids was reframed not as a failure, but as a tragic martyrdom born of treachery. The image of the drinking cup, while gruesome, elevated him to a mythic status. It suggested that he was so powerful that even in death, his physical remains held a value that gold could not match. He became a ghost that haunted the steppe, a warning to all future rulers that the river has eyes and the grass has ears. Even today, the Dnieper flows past the places where the rapids once roared, though they have been quieted by modern dams and the passage of time. But the soil still holds the secrets of that spring morning. The exact location of the ambush remains a subject of debate among historians, a puzzle piece lost in the shifting silt of a millennium. Some suggest that the silver skull might still exist, hidden in some forgotten hoard or buried beneath the dust of 1,000 years of conflict. It remains one of history's most evocative artifacts, whether it exists in a museum or only in the pages of the chronicles. It is a symbol of a time when the world was wide, dangerous, and utterly unforgiving. The story of Sviatoslav is a dark thriller because it contains the perfect ingredients for a tragedy. A protagonist of immense strength, a fatal flaw of overextension, and a betrayal that feels both inevitable and shocking. It is a narrative about the limits of human will. Sviatoslav believed he could outrun the empires and outfight the wilderness. He believed that his personal code of honor and simplicity would protect him from the complexities of Byzantine intrigue. In the end, he was undone by the very thing he excelled at, the unpredictable nature of the frontier. He was a man who lived by the sword, and the sword eventually demanded its payment. The transition from a living prince to a silver trophy is a journey that mirrors the transition of the region itself. From a collection of warring tribes and Norse adventurers to a centralized state, the path was carved with difficulty. Sviatoslav was the last of the great Viking-style princes, a man who belonged more to the age of sagas than to the age of bureaucracy. His death marked the closing of a door. The silver skull was the key that locked it. As the Khan raised the cup, he was not just celebrating a tactical victory. He was marking the end of an era of northern dominance. When we consider the risks and conflicts of the past, we often look for lessons. Perhaps the lesson of the Dnieper is that the greatest danger often comes when we think we are on the home stretch. Sviatoslav had survived the grand battles. He was lost in the logistical struggle of a retreat. He was lost because he underestimated the reach of a distant enemy's whisper. The dark thriller of his life reminds us that in the game of power, there is no such thing as safe passage. There is only the next bend in the river and the shadows that wait just beyond the light of the campfire. The river continues its journey, carrying the stories of the fallen toward the sea. The rapids may be gone, but the memory of the prince who walked like a soldier and died like a king remains. The silver skull, whether real or symbolic, serves as a testament to a time when life was cheap, but honor was expensive. It is a story told in the silence of the forest and the rush of the water, a tale of a silver-lined end for a man who lived a life of iron. In the darkness of history, some names shine brighter than others, not because of how they lived, but because of the chilling way their light was extinguished. The Dnieper does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget the price of the crown it carried to the sea. To stand on the riverbank today is to feel the weight of that silence. The landscape has changed, but the fundamental tension remains. The struggle between the man who builds and the man who destroys, the whisper of the palace and the roar of the rapid. Sviatoslav was a man who tried to be a storm, forgetting that even storms eventually run out of rain. His death was a masterpiece of geopolitical treachery, a reminder that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who offer a hand in friendship, while the other hand signals the archers. The silver skull was never just a cup. It was a statement. It said that the North had been tamed, that the wildness of the Viking Age was being polished and encased in the silver of the New World. But legends are harder to contain than bone. Sviatoslav's spirit, much like the river itself, continues to flow through the history of the land he helped forge. He remains a figure of shadow and steel, a prince who refused to be a king in a palace, choosing instead to be a ghost in the grass. His end was dark, it was brutal, and it was final. But in the cold light of history, that silver-lined skull still gleams, a haunting reminder of the day the Dnieper forgot the names of the kings, but remembered the exact weight of their fallen pride.